Unmute, okay. I'm going to start the recording. We're live on Facebook now. I appreciate everybody that came out tonight. This is great. Where's the record button? There it is. Okay. Okay. Well, this is, I'm really pleased to have this program tonight and to welcome our main speaker and our other speakers. It's just, this is a tremendous lineup. And Max, we're thrilled to have Max Elbaum here. And he co-edited this book, which was in the email. And if people haven't gotten it, the link to it is in the chat. Please, I recommend that everybody get it and write it. Power concedes nothing, how grassroots organizing wins elections. And he edited that with Linda Burnham and Marie Pablik. Did I say that right, Max? But it's an excellent book. I've got it. I'm in the process of reading it right now. And I hope everybody will do that. And not only use this book tonight for our discussion, but I think this is a useful tool as we go forward to the 22 and 24 elections, because these are, I think, we all understand how important this election is and what's at stake. And the lessons that the grassroots organizing has gotten is wonderful, and there's a lot we can use. And I would suggest that people get it, use it locally, and hopefully we can have some more national discussions on it as well. And aside from editing this book, I'm sure Max, or most people are probably familiar with Max, but he's been a peace, anti-racist and radical movement in the radical movement since joining SDS in Madison, Wisconsin in 1960. And the third edition of his book, Revolution in the Air, the 60s radicals turned to Lenin, Mao, and Che, was released by Verso in 2018. And that's when I first became aware of Max, is when I read that book a number of years ago. So it's really exciting to have him here. And he is going to present on the book, and then Jamala Rogers and Jurie will join him in a conversation about the book and the discussion, and then we'll open it up for general conversation for everybody that's here. So, and I'll just go on to introduce Jamala Rogers is a longtime respected organizer, strategist, and feminist in the Black liberation movement. She has written many articles and essays for various publications. She is the author of several books, including Ferguson in America, Roots and Rebellion, and as a featured columnist in 3 publications. In addition to her community organizing, Rogers is currently working on an archival project of organization she belonged or belongs to, such as Congress of African People, the League of Revolutionary Struggle, Marxist-Leninist, and the Organization for Black Struggle. She serves on the planning committee for the National Black Political Convention in 2022, which will be held in Newark, New Jersey this summer, celebrating the 50th anniversary since the historic Gary convention. So welcome, Jamala. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here. And last but not least, Jurie. He's also going to be entering a conversation there. Jay resides in Sanford, Florida. He retired in 2018 after 32 years with public school affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, where he taught, researched, and wrote in areas of urban and regional planning and public policy. He is a member of the retired chapter of the United Faculty of Florida, and in that capacity, a delegate to the Central Labor Council of Central Florida. He is a member of the board of directors of Medicare for All Florida. He is a precinct captain with the Seminole County Democratic Party and is the chair of the party's Progressive Organizing Committee. He's a member of the Central Florida's Progressive Democrats of America, PDA, and formerly involved with Students for a Democratic Society and the New American Movement. Jay is a avowed democratic socialist and currently serves on the National Coordinating Committee of Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, and a member of several CCDS committees. He has written a number of articles, essays, book chapters, and columns on various programs and left causes and issues. So thank you, Jay, for joining us. And now let's turn over and let's see what we can do in these elections coming up. I will pass this on to Max, if that's okay with you, Max.
Well, thanks. Nice to be in conversation with all of you, and thanks to the Committees of Correspondence for sponsoring this event. So I'm going to say a little bit about the landscape that's facing us in 2022 and 2024, and then talk about the way that this book, Power Concedes Nothing, can be a resource to help us win these elections. So the key thing hovering over all of us in 2022 and 2024 is the fact that one of the two major parties, the Republican Party, has been captured by racist authoritarianism. So it's driving forward to try to impose some kind of hybrid of Jim Crow and McCarthyism on the country. As Bill Fletcher put it, and he's spoken here many times, I know, the Republican Party's become the party for dictatorship. And every day there's events that indicate what we'd be in for, what we're in for already with their counteroffensive against us, and what we'd be in for if they won political power. So maybe Jay will talk a little bit about what DeSantis is doing in Florida and imposing an authoritarian rule in that important state. You can watch the debate that just happened in Ohio with J.D. Vance and Mandel, competing to who can be more anti-democratic. Vance calling for explicit repression, firing anybody who's on the left. And to him, the left extends all the way to the right of Joe Biden. And if we want to see how deep the Republican Party has seeped into anti-Black racism, I'm sure all of you watched at least some portion of the hearings on Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme Court. I mean, that was over the top. So that's what we're facing. And they can be beaten in 2022 and 2024 because the majority of people in this country and even the majority of the electorate is opposed to their program. But it's going to be harder to beat them in 2022 and 2024 than it was in 2018 and 2020. And the reasons for that, there's a whole slew of reasons. One reason is the intensified voter suppression in states where the Republican Party controls the legislature ownership, gerrymandering in those states to increase the rigging of a system that's already rigged against people of color and against the majority of people to ensure one-party rule. They've also been able, with the help of people like Manchin and Sinema, to block most of the progressive legislation that was proposed by the administration that was enthusiastically pushed by the progressive wing of the anti-right front. And that has meant that there's a lot of frustration and disappointment in the constituencies that voted against Trump in 2018 and 2020 and hope for major changes. I could also add that the mainstream of the Democratic Party has been inept in messaging and in narrative about what has actually occurred in the last year, why certain things were blocked, or even claiming credit for the gains that they did make and things that they were able to push through. So we're facing a tough political landscape in 2022 and 2024. And the purpose of the book, Power Concedes Nothing, which we began work on a little more than a year ago, was to help prepare the progressive wing, especially at grassroots organizers, for the challenges in this next election and the one in 2024. The 2020 election saw an outpouring of work, grassroots organizing that made a difference in the outcome by groups that not only saw the importance of defeating the racist authoritarian right, but had a power building strategy for long-term progressive change. They saw the need to integrate electoral work into social justice organizing and to build a base in communities, not just that was anti-right wing, but that was for social change and radical transformation. They were working especially in constituencies that the Democratic Party, the mainstream of the Democratic Party, has neglected for the last decade or two at least. And in doing so, combining the project of defeating the right and building their own independent base and their own independent organizations. The purpose, when Maria, Linda, and I got together and decided to work on, came up with this idea of trying to produce a book in a year's time, we had a number of goals. First of all, we wanted to get this work on the record. It's often the work that's under the radar screen. Rather than being out there it's not in the mainstream media, and even sometimes the progressive media falls into the horse race, two-party view of how to analyze politics and not looking at the concrete forces on the ground, especially since they're working in communities that are often ignored by the mainstream. We thought it was important that the stories of that work be told by the organizers themselves. We have a lot of respect for journalists, pundits, academics. All those play an important role, but there's nothing like having the organizers on the ground tell their own stories. That made it in some ways more difficult. Because these are folks who are quite busy with their day-to-day work. They're on a timetable that the members of organizations and activists are on. To them, there wasn't time off in between election cycles because they're building power. They're trying to integrate election work into year-round campaigning work and building organization on the ground. That made it difficult, but we managed to convince enough people to take the time to do that kind of summation and evaluation, which was another goal of the book, to try to foster the culture of evaluation and lesson learning on the left, something that many of us came up with, but is often neglected in the heat of the moment and the need to get on with the next campaign. There were many lessons. We wanted to get those lessons out there. And then, although we weren't, it was part of our thinking from the beginning, but it was something that grew on us over the course of the last year, which was the book as a source of inspiration and hope. Over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of demoralization in the progressive movement. People seeing frustrated with where things are, the ability of the far right to regroup after January 6th and come back even more united and even stronger than they were going into the 2020 election. And some of the limitations of what we've accomplished in terms of legislation that we hope to see passed. The book's a reminder of the tremendous work that was done in 2020 and the kind of efforts that can lead to victory. So we also think the book is a source of inspiration and hope, as well as organizing lessons for grassroots organizers. The book is not completely comprehensive. No one book can cover every sector and every organization that threw down in 2020. Just for example, it's a weakness that there wasn't more about feminist organizing and the role of the women's movement in 2020. We weren't able to get a piece on the Muslim sector. There are many progressive and left organizations, I'm sure some that are people who are members of who are on this call that aren't represented in the book. But we do think we made a pretty good shot at getting a diversity of organizations. They don't all agree with each other, all the authors, they have differences of opinion, but it's a very broad perspective on what was done in 2020. There's 5 sections in the book. The first section is called Building Power in the States, and that focuses on specific state-based power building groups and efforts in particular states, especially the key battleground states in 2020. Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Florida, Virginia, these were all covered in that chapter, and a deep dive into forces, organizations, and the various state tables that tried to coordinate work in specific states. The second section was called Communities of Color Drive the Win. It was our opinion that the decisive factor in beating Trump in 2020 and in the gains that were made in terms of the Senate and the House, it was the turnout in communities of color that made the difference. And we wanted to analyze those. So there's a chapter on the Black vote, the Latino vote, the Native vote, and the Asian American vote. The third section is Workers on the Doors. That on the doors especially highlights the Unite Here chapter, as Unite Here took the lead in the trade union movement in organizing door canvassing, even in the conditions of the pandemic, developing those protocols and playing that kind of role. I think people here don't need much discussion on this importance of the labor movement. It's the broad mass organization that brings people together across their political differences. Their membership in a union is it's not like a voluntary political organization. It's an organization that brings people together because they share common conditions of work. Those kinds of organizations are historically and currently very important for playing any kind of role if we're going to rebuild progressive power and a strong left in the United States, not to mention saving what's left of American democracy. The fourth section deals with Bernie's campaign, democratic socialism, and the various organizations in that orbit, which played an outstanding role since 2016 in galvanizing progressive energy, and then different ones of them played different roles in 2020. There's a deep chapter about DSA and some of the contradictions in DSA's approach to the 2020 election, as well as coverage of our revolution and people who were positioned within Bernie's campaign, taking a self-critical and critical look at what was accomplished and then where there were some shortcomings in that campaign. The last section is about the national coalitions and national organizations, the relationship of national organizations to state-based and local organizations, and some of the efforts to work on a national level. So those are the five sections. Each one has a number of chapters. I'll just close by talking about a few of the themes that pop up within most of keep popping up in the book in various places. The first theme is almost without exception, there's a critique of the idea that there are low propensity voters, people who just won't show up at the polls. There's a critique and an alternative view that these are low investment voters. They don't vote because people haven't given them anything to vote for. They don't vote because people don't pay attention to their concerns. And a lot of the framework of these power building groups is that if you go to those constituencies, especially in people of color communities, in poor communities, in rural communities, you knock on doors that no one's ever knocked on a door. You're around after the election if you're building a local organization that's in it for the long haul, as opposed to parachuting in asking for people's vote, and they don't see you again until 2 years or 4 years later. So there's a whole perspective that flips the script on how do we look at people who have not participated in the electoral front of battle. There's a second theme about integrating elections into the ongoing work year-round on different campaigns and different issues, and the use of other fronts of struggle, strikes, demonstrations, mass action, propaganda, agitation, that it's not strictly an electoral thing. It's a power-building strategies that include electoral work as essential, but is not limited to electoral work. There's the theme of how to build collaboration and cooperation both within particular states, between different organizations, and between local organizations and national organizations. Probably in fall 2020, spring and fall, summer and fall 2020, and then in the period from November until January 20th, when we had to protect the results. I would say from reading this book and other information that there was more collaboration between different organizations on the left and in the progressive world than there's been for 10 or 20 years, and perhaps even since the Rainbow Coalition in the 1980s. As people gathered in state tables, it wasn't always easy to coordinate the work, but a number of the chapters and even the relationships between local and national work, there's some really interesting lessons there. There's also lessons in all the chapters, not just the chapters about the communities of color, about the need to confront head-on racism, white supremacy, and message and talk about that. You know, the right wing talks about it, and there's a faction in the Democratic Party and the consultant class that says the main thing to do when the Republicans talk about that is change the subject. Just talk about things that are popular and will appeal to people. It's a losing strategy. It means that the only messages, if it's pursued, the only messages out there on race are racist messages. You have to take that on. Now, not every group in the book that writes has exactly the same strategy of how you take that on, but without exception, the forces that were written about in that work, there's many lessons there about how they do that, about understanding the particularities of each specific community and crafting your message, understanding that no community is monolithic, and the different ways we need to operate if we're going to really build a movement that not only staves off the offensive of the radical right, the reactionaries, those who want to impose Jim Crow 2.0, but build some momentum for progressive change so that this time around, we not only stop the right, but we come out of it, that the power building social justice progressive sector can't be pushed to the margins again after we defeat the right. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Max. That was great. And we can open up the conversation and bring in Jamala and Jay. Jamala, would you like to start off?
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to say a little bit about you talked about the Democrats being inept in messaging. And I would say they're also inept in strategic planning and action. You know, they have been MIA for a while. And so when we think about how you build in between campaigns or even building towards campaigns, there's been little attention paid to communities of color in general, unless it's some big, you know, high profile people. So I guess my question for you is, for some of us, there's been this inside outside strategy of working inside the party and then working outside of the party. What do you think is a strategy now going into 2022 and 2024 when you have a weakened left, you have all of the things that you said at the beginning of your presentation that don't exactly exude, you know, power or strength? what is a viable strategy for the movement going into this next election cycle?
Okay. Well, I have a few ideas. I certainly don't have the whole thing, but I think the first point is there was an outpouring in 2018 and 2020 of voters who were motivated by two things. One, fear of Trump and Trumpism, and two, aspirations for some significant change. And I think we have to keep both of those in the mix in our messaging to people. I think that our messaging has to be, we have to remind people of how dangerous the Trumpists are, and we need to reassert a progressive program and have organizations on the ground where people feel that those organizations are going to be there and fighting for that change even beyond the election. And I think there does need to be some education about what it takes to move this country. And that fundamentally, even though we made some gains in the Senate and the House, they were too small to accomplish what we need. So we have to come back and have a bigger margin and more progressives. We need more people like the Squad, and we need more people like Bernie in the Senate, and we need a bigger majority so the Manchins and Sinemas don't have the kind of leverage that they had. That's on the messaging side. And then on the base building side, I think that every state and every area needs a group like Lucha in Arizona, Florida Rising in Florida, New Virginia Majority, Wellstone Action in Minnesota, the Detroit Action and Michigan, People United in Michigan. I mean, we need to build those kinds of organizations. People are building them, like in North Carolina, the New Carolina Federation that's being a number of people are trying to move. Without organizations like that and organizations on the national level, like Working Families Party, PDA, Our Revolution, we're not going to be able to exert any leverage. And there needs to be more coordination between those organizations, and we have to sign up for them and try to strengthen them.
Okay, very good. Jay, would you like to join this conversation?
Sure. Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Max, for your very thoughtful presentation, and Jamala for your comments. And glad to see everyone here this evening. I've got something like 2.5 things I want to say. I've got a whole bunch of things I'd like to say, but I think 2.5 I want to toss in, at least right now, as kind of some kickoff for this conversation. First, Max mentioned and sort of asked me about Florida politics, so I want to comment on that just a bit. First thing I'll mention in that regard is that there was a sit-in at the state capitol the other day, and probably a lot of you saw that because it did make national news, where DeSantis and his crowd in Tallahassee flat out eliminated 2 Black congressional districts, just wiped them off the map. And so now they're going to up the percentage of House representatives in the U.S. House. Older white males would be older white conservative males, or these days, as Max says, authoritarian types. Florida is a state I would characterize as having been a purple state for a long time, but now it's moving to what I would call pink, and moving further from pink in the direction of red. Trump won the state by some 300,000 votes, as opposed to Joe Biden in the last election. And you might recall previously, going back to when W. Bush narrowly beat Al Gore in the 2000 election, it was contested like for 567 votes or something, supposedly. So that sort of gives you a sense of what's going on in Florida. And in part, I would attribute that to some influx of right-wing Latin Americans. Every time the United States gets into a war in Nicaragua or conflict with Nicaragua, El Salvador, Bolivia, Venezuela, and whoever else, the door is flung open for those folks to come to this country, and a lot of them wind up settling in Florida. And once they get their voting rights, they vote to the right. Now, I've met a fair number of these people, so they really are out there. The other thing I want to say, I think, is probably perhaps most relevant on that note to this conversation, is what I would describe as the top-down nature of both the national and the Florida Democratic parties when it comes particularly to Florida. I would say actually in a sense, there's two Democratic parties in the state of Florida. There's the party establishment, and they're the ones that basically anoint all of the candidates. And when I say all, I mean not just for the national and statewide offices, but even reaching down into the local offices, not all the way to the municipal level usually, but oftentimes they have a hand to play in the state legislative races, certainly. They don't bring the base into those kind of conversations. They basically say, well, here's your candidate, and so here's who you need to fundraise for, and here's who you need to go out and pound the pavement to get voted into office. And the really sad part, and this is where a lot of my struggle is oriented in Florida, is with the base who's bought into that. I keep raising objections saying, well, we really, at the grassroots, particularly the name of the organization is the Democratic Party, where is the democracy in this? But I find that to be an ongoing struggle, and that's something I'm continuing to work on. The other thing I want to bring out is I don't think that we on the left certainly have emphasized enough the role of corporate power. And I mean, that's who we are. We are, for the most part, most of us are democratic socialists of one sort or another. We blame the Republicans, which we should. We blame the far right, which, heaven help us, certainly we should. But we tend to give corporate America a pass to a large extent. And corporate America is what's behind a lot of the stuff that's going wrong in people's lives. And if we don't point that out, I don't know who will. And I'm not saying that just to make a moral point, but to say, I think if we can find ways to open people's eyes as to the real source of their oppression, that we would win a whole lot more recruits. And I think it's happened. I think there's some history in this country that shows at different times in different places that's what's taken place. But we've kind of, on the left, we seem like we've almost kind of walked away from that role. And I'd like to see us bring it back. And just to finish up what I'm saying for now on that note, I put in the chat the title and a link to something that came out recently, the best legislature money can buy. And my friends in CCDS saw this yesterday. I'm beating the drum real loud with this. And Max and Jamala, the folks you work with, I want particularly to bring this to your attention because I think you might find this to be a very instructive and useful document if you haven't seen it. I mean, you may well have already seen it. I don't know. But Max, you mentioned Florida Rising. There's several groups that authored this thing. And Florida Rising is one of those groups. And at the last, one of the things they've done is that they came up with a list of the major corporations in Florida who've been, the major donors to the Republican Party. So right there, they've provided kind of a template for unraveling how all this stuff happens and how it all winds up ultimately getting shoved down the throats of the voters and the public at large in the state of Florida. So I'll finish there.
Max or Jamala, did you want to follow up from there or have some points you want to make? Just kind of open it up for discussion.
I mean, I definitely agree about the corporate piece. I think when we look at, and this goes for both Democratic and Republicans, like who is, wagging whose tail. But the other thing that for me is always an issue is the limitations of what we can do without a national framework or infrastructure. So I hear what you're saying about, we need to boost up those organizations who are doing base building on the ground and then connect them. And unfortunately, most of them don't have the capacity to pull other folks together. So we haven't done that very well. But I was thinking about like when what's always missing in these conversations is the role of the left. And we know that it's probably at its most weakest state right now. But, we see it when we look at unions, the kind of organizing that could have, should have been done there. And you have, folks being hauled off to jail based on stealing money. I mean, it's nothing very inspirational there for workers to look at and say, here is a democratic model that we need to aspire to, we need to build, we need to support. So, when I'm start looking at like, what can we hold up to the working class to say, here's our vision of what we're fighting for, it gets a little muddled. And I just penned a piece last week on the environment and like asking, can Earth Day be relevant again? And I don't think it can. It's been totally co-opted and commercialized. You got the folks who basically are the enemies of the environment, underwriting these folks. So where are we going with that? So my point is like, it's such a confused mess for people in terms of sharpening up our vision about what socialism would look like in this country, what any kind of radical transformation would look like. And you point to the people that we normally would point to as the North Star, unions, community groups, yada, yada, yada. Even if, in some cases, the Democratic Party, and it's just no there. So I don't know if we put all the eggs in the baskets of local organizations who only have so much capacity. And I could speak for a number of the groups that I'm involved in here in St. Louis. And believe me, much is being asked of us because the demand and the need is so great. However, what are the other tools that we can use to coalesce people in a different kind of way? I mean, I know people are kind of tired of Zoom, and Zoom is not the end all be all, but I agree that there needs to be a bit more networking with the groups that are actually doing the work on the ground. And we just haven't been able to do that in an effective way.
Yeah, well, that's a crucial point. And, Jesse Jackson had many limitations, but he took initiative at a certain stage to build the rainbow as an independent force. And for most of the 80s, it acted as an overall pole that linked electoral work to grassroots organizing, strikes, work, farmers, the peace movement, and the other movements of the time. And we need something like that. And the rainbow also had a left wing. The rainbow was a broad progressive coalition. It wasn't exclusively left, but it had a left wing. And we need a left wing of a broader rainbow type form today also. It's very complicated about how we get from here to there. I mentioned Working Families, PDA, Our Revolution. You could also throw in Justice Democrats, DSA. These are forms, they all, from 10,000 feet up, the political differences are secondary. But for structural reasons, and the fact that we've been in a 50-year rollback against the gains of the 60s, things have gotten fragmented in a way that is to our disadvantage. This is a left group, so I think we can talk about it in a different way. It's very difficult in US history to build that kind of unity that's needed without a presidential campaign by a progressive standard bearer. That's very hard to do otherwise. The CIO managed it in the 30s to build the CIO as the anchor of a broad progressive alignment. But otherwise, you had the radical Republicans in the pre-Civil War era. You had Martin Luther King playing a certain role that wasn't electoral, but the scope of the civil rights movement, Jesse in the 80s. I don't think there's a simple way to get from where we are now to national cohesion, both on the broad progressive level and on the radical left level. We're going to have to do some careful work to do that on both of those levels and work with the people who are the most promising, who think in the most broad-minded terms, like you just said, Jamala. That is part of the project. That's not part of the book per se, but Convergence, the magazine that sponsored the book, that's part of our mission, to try to build more coherence, both on the level of socialist left and on the level of the broad progressive movement. I wish I had a roadmap for that, but I don't.
So maybe other folks on the call can give the winning strategy once we open up.
Okay.
Right. I see one hand up, and if you can use the raise hand feature in your under reactions in the Zoom controls, that should be on the bottom of your screen. And if there are no controls, then wiggle your mouse a little. They should come up, and click on reactions. If you don't see reactions, there'll be something that says more. Click on more, and more kinds of controls will come up. And within reactions, at the bottom, it says raise hand, and click on that and your hand will raise. Okay, in the order that you have. So, Harry Targ, I will allow you to unmute.
Open this up, open this up for general discussion. So.
Okay, hi. I've been doing some research on polling data and public opinion data, and one factoid that came to my attention just a couple days ago was that in 2020, the rate of voting, eligible voters, was highest in the last 80 years. But despite that, there were 80 million people who did not vote. And I'd be interested in hearing the panelists talk about this and talk about a strategy at the local level of whether groups could identify low voter turnout communities and whether those communities should be targeted for attention. So that's my question for the panelists.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, of course. But this goes back to the comment I made about the Democratic Party. Those are the voters that, I know the Organization for Black Struggle has always targeted. And it's getting harder and harder each time because they're getting more and more demoralized with even playing with this system because they have not seen any material change in their conditions. And so the vote is for what? Just recently, voters in St. Louis passed something called Prop R, which does a couple of things. One is it takes the redistricting mapping process out of the hands of the local legislators who traditionally have done that. They have no confidence in them whatsoever, black, brown, black, white, or whatever. And then they also, part of that proposition was that those legislators had to disclose their financial interests so that any conflicts there with the people would clearly be transparent. So there's a growing, effort, and it's been done by, many groups in terms of educating these voters about where the power is. And I think it's always been the power is with you. Doesn't have to be in the Democratic Party. You don't have to rely on these people. You got to do it for yourself. So I think when it comes to that, that is not sexy work, Harry. Nobody wants to fund that work. And so for those of us who are doing it, we're doing it year around. You can't just wait till the election and then start trying to pump people up because they don't want to hear you. And so that kind of off-cycle work is rarely funded. And so it is a different kind of commitment that I think groups are making to do that work. But it is being done, not at the scale that it needs to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Good. Susan? Put your hand up.
Janet, I've got them in order.
Oh, okay.
George Ripley's hand was up before.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm sorry I was late to the event. I certainly am. Grassroots is all about what I do. And one of the strategies that I work with has to do with capture the flag. We all saw how the Trump base generated huge excitement and lots of colorful attention in the media by their passionate flag waving. Of course, Trump kind of took the flag and embraced it quite publicly. And I'm reminded too of the old quote that when tyranny comes to America, it'll be wrapped in the flag and holding the Bible. And of course, Trump not only held up the Bible after chasing the protesters away from Lafayette Park, but also embraced the flag. So we've got our tyrant, and now we have to make sure that he doesn't come back. And I would suggest that we could use the flag with equal effectiveness as his base has. Certainly, we all want to be proud of America once again someday, and build back better and make America great and all that. And that kind of enthusiasm we can use to generate publicity at that grassroots level in our protests across the spectrum of issues, and make some big PR out of it. Just to throw that out there, and appreciate your listening. No responses, no questions, no feedback, no throwback. Maybe that's the point. There is, I think, a general disdain for the flag on the left. And as I say, I think it's because there's an antipathy towards tyranny and but on the other hand, to relinquish the Bible and the flag, two very powerful symbols, may not be the smartest thing in the world. I'll leave you with this. I have my project is actually the grassroots flag of America. This is my answer to the gold fringe flag. And you'll see the adornment on top of the flag poles in replacing the military spear point for spears of wheat, replacing the cannonball for the blue-green planet, and replacing the Imperial Roman eagle, the same eagle we blew off the Reichstag in Berlin with the dove descending. So as I push these out into the national marketplace, 80% of the proceeds will go to support electoral issue groups that are working for social justice. So that are working for democracy, because we've got to fix our elections if we're ever going to achieve social justice.
Well, I mean, you've raised a complicated issue. Let me put it this way. I do think there are two competing traditions that in the United States, it's been a constant struggle since 1619 and before. For, on the one hand, a popular democratic movement that's risen from below, and the ruling class. It's tried to establish a genocidal and racist capitalist country. I definitely think we should draw on the tradition of the progressive part of the United States. That was the significance of the 1619 Project. And I think we should make every point that the Trumpists are the heirs to the Confederacy, who rebelled against the idea of a country that was a multiracial democracy. And we should foreground the fact that we're fighting for a multiracial democracy. We could call on Langston Hughes or Martin Luther King about the promise of America. But I think it's very tricky to reduce that to the flag because in a certain context, if that's the dominant narrative, you can tuck the American flag into that. But left on its own, I think it's very complicated and doesn't work for us. So I think we have to firm up the narrative of what our tradition is and fight for that. I don't think we should cede the fact that America is them and we're something else, but we're in a fight over who built America, who built the world capitalist economy. It was the working class and enslaved people, not the corporate power.
Good, thank you.
All right, if we're ready, we're going to move on. George, if you would mute yourself. And next up is Carl Davidson, if I could get him unmuted.
One thing I've learned recently is that we need to keep in mind a couple of things, actually. Outside of some major cities, the Democratic Party is, at the base is incredibly weak. And it's not going to get stronger by itself. If it gets stronger, it's going to be because we build organization independent in the sense that we're not necessarily subject to any discipline from the Democratic National Committee, but at the same time that it's a progressive democratic wing or faction that has to be grown at the grassroots, and that we actually have to build the organization. And in some cases, that will require us to take certain committee posts within the local Democratic Party. I know the one here where I live has begged us to come and help them. They have open seats. Tina from PDA has taken on one of them and helped them pull together a Young Democrats, which is non-existent for a long time. So I think that's something that's very important. And another thing to keep in mind is that I learned recently is that the Democratic Party's ballot line does not belong to the Democratic Party. It's a state institution. It belongs to state government. It's a feature of state government. That's why anybody who fulfills the requirements can get themselves on the Democratic line, whether the Democratic Party likes it or not. That's a little known fact that the ballot line designation does not belong to the Democratic Party itself, but belongs to the state government. So that's an argument for making use of it on our part to build our own organizations at the base and to make use of the Democratic Party ballot line to do it. I think the last point I want to make is that there's a need for a diversity of approaches depending on where we are. And for example, here, if I look at myself as Greater Pittsburgh and part of the Pittsburgh Blue Bloc, we're about to elect a great a new congressperson, Summer Lee, who's going to add to the squad. And I think we're a young African-American woman, I think we're likely to do so. We're also likely to send, our former Mayor Braddock. He may end up going to John Fetterman. He may end up going to the Senate. But those are part of the Pittsburgh bloc. But just one step out of there in the really devastated Rust Belt area where I live is Trump country. And so any tactics that would work in, say, the city of Pittsburgh or the city of Chicago or the Bay Area don't make much sense where I am. We have a lot of different kinds of alliances we have to make that some people might not be that concerned about. And we also have to be concerned, we also have to concern ourselves with winning back a sliver of people, of Trump voters. Many of them we know from, we grew up with, we know that they were Obama to Trump flippers. And I don't think we can flip all of them back, but even if we can get 10% of them back, it would help us to get to 50% plus one and take the county and then take the state back. All of these are absolutely important because one of the most amazing statistics that I've come across recently is some 30% of the election workers in our state here in Pennsylvania have resigned in the last year for fear of the threats to their life by the fascists. And I don't use that term lightly. And the Republican fascists in the state house and their local organizations have threatened the lives of so many people that 30% of our election workers have resigned. So that begins to show you some of the seriousness of what we're up against and what kinds of organizations we have to build. I talk in terms of building organizations and campaigns more than I do building movements. I think the capitalists build movements for us by making outrageous attacks on us. Anything from starting wars to George Floyd. But we have to build the campaigns that can bridge movement to movement as they ebb and flow, and build organizations within those campaigns that can grow in strength as we move on. I think I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I started checking out the book, and I think it's very timely, and I think we can do a lot more with it over the next, between now and November.
Janet, if I may, before you call on someone else, I was reading Jay's comments in the chat. And I think this issue of how do we deal with white working class folks has been an issue that we've sidestepped for a while. When I think about the 75 million, mainly white people that voted for Trump, that was a clear signal that we have work to do. And as yet, I have not heard a strategy about how do we win over some of them. All of them can't be like backward fascist folks, but those are not folks that sit at my dining room table. They sit at y'all's. So what's the strategy for them, even in our own spheres of talking with these people? We hear them, we know, y'all know them. Like, what can we do differently in this next election cycle that is going to reduce those numbers? Because it sounds like to me, they're on a roll, and they may be more than the 75,000 that come out. Because if our low propensity voters say the hell with the next election and they get all of their folks out, we could have another Trump or Trump-like person that's going to occupy that White House.
May I respond, Janet or someone? I know there's some hands up, but just to respond immediately to Jamala's point. One thing, of course, that confronts us are all the wedge issues. And the Republicans have convinced people that their guns or abortion, or, I'm not saying those are not important issues, but they've convinced these folks that those are the most important issues in their lives. So I want to go back and beat my drum yet again about corporate power and corporate rule. If we can really show people that this is what's making the major difference in their lives, why they're struggling to put food on the table, to make their car payments, and the rest of it. I think this is one way we can talk to the rural Republicans in states like Florida, or the white working class, wherever we might find them.
If I can just follow up on that. We opened the book with the chapter on Georgia, and that wasn't an accident, because Georgia was crucial in 2020, not just for the presidency, but the winning of the 2 Senate seats. And that chapter is very rich in those lessons about how people built over decades, coming off Stacey Abrams' work, and the kind of campaigns that goes into every community. One of the 4 people who contributed to that chapter from Surge, showing up for racial justice, tackled exactly the important issue that Jamala put on the table, which is how they're digging in and what slivers of the white vote in Georgia, including in rural Georgia, that they were able to turn, because they built an apparatus in the state, and they're going to white communities that no one ever knocks on the door. And they've been neglected, not just by the Democrats, yes, by the Democrats, but also by the Republicans. So there are ways to do that, but it requires a long-term investment. It can't be done by parachuting. I mean, the Surge people made a million calls and texts to white households within Georgia. That made a bit of a difference, but it wouldn't have made any difference if they didn't have people on the ground who were doing stuff in the state and part of that Georgia coalition. So I noticed, I think it was Eddie Wong that posted in the chat the point about the youth vote in Georgia and how important that was, because they built a whole operation out of the historic colleges, but it's not strictly Black, it's multiracial. So, I mean, the answers to some of these things are, it's the organizers in the book. I don't have the answers, or to the extent I have them, it's because I learned them from reading what the folks on the ground have been doing. So I really encourage people to look at that Georgia chapter, because it's not only rich in lessons, but it really does talk about what can be duplicated in other places. So I'll stop there.
Moving on. Next, so if I don't have everything wrong, is Susan Chassin, and I will unmute.
Thank you. Kind of adding on, continuing the role about messaging and reaching white working class people that are confused. I just want to raise up this book by Ian Haney Lopez called Merge Left. Heather McGee worked on extensive research about how to talk about the fact that the ruling class is keeping us divided, and that we're all better off when we're all better off. One of the things that our kind of reach could do as leftists around the country with connections could be talking about messaging. And I have a question, because there's been a lot of controversy about how much to focus on the fear and denouncing authoritarianism and the dangers of more Republicans getting into office, compared to talking about our program and corporate, how we need, what we need in terms of healthcare and climate and housing, and the fact that corporate power has really destroyed all of those things. I think we can do both, but I've been struggling in DSA to try and get more of an openness to a united front, because with the thousands, I want to kind of question Jamala's statement that the left is weaker. If you look at the Working Families, PDA, Our Revolution, Justice Democrats, including DSA, and groups like the Poor People's Movement campaign, we're more polarized, and the left is on the defensive, but we have a tremendous upsurge of this grassroots organizing that Max has been talking about. So could a united left kind of network among us and fellow travelers spread a consistent message? Because one of the things that the Democrats aren't doing is focusing on both the authoritarian dangers on the right and how the Republicans have completely shortcut or cut off possibilities for climate change or healthcare or housing reform. How do we do both? But we've got to do them. And as leftists, and democratic socialists, we can spread these messages and try and build the consistency. You know, that's how the Contract with America did it. They used to use cassettes with the message. And if we could help the Democrats gather a consistent resist the right, resist authoritarianism and corporate power through something like the race class analysis, maybe leftists could contribute. That's it.
No comments?
No, I agree.
Oh, yeah, I mean, United Front of those groups you mentioned, I mean, that happened to a degree in 2020. But you mentioned what you're struggling with in DSA. I mean, there was the United Front formation that backed Bernie pivoted when Bernie endorsed Biden, and all the groups in it stayed in that coalition to defeat Trump, except DSA, which dropped out because DSA politically was not prepared to throw down in the general. And that struggle is still being waged within DSA in different forms. So yes, DSA, I think it was Joe that posted in the chat, the left is certainly stronger than it was in 2015. Before Bernie's campaign, we weren't even we were nowhere. The left was a protest movement. It's only since 2015, 2016 that the left is even in the game in terms of struggling for political power. And now we have a foothold. But we're weaker than we were 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And we still are institutionally much weaker than our opposition, either our opposition on the Trumpist side or the mainstream Dems. We're still weaker than they are. I think Carl made the point that their base is very thin, which I think is true, but we haven't made the sufficient inroads, and we don't have the institutional strength yet where we're stronger than they are. Now, we have the potential to do that. I think that's why we're all here, because we think we can accomplish that, but we haven't accomplished it yet. And what happens in DSA and these fights within DSA about whether it's going to participate in a broad united front against the right, or whether it's going to do things like expel the most progressive Black person in Congress, Black male in Congress, I mean, that's up for grabs. So it's a complicated thing in the different organizations that could make up that front about where we go. I mean, we just have to traverse that terrain as best we can and hope for the best and build on where the gains have been made.
Okay. All right, Meiju Lee is up next. They're unmuted, maybe.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, first of all, you talk about 2016, Max, but really this is a long game. And for some of the groups that are somewhat successful, like Working Families Party or Virginia New Majority, they actually started 20 years ago. So it takes time to build it. And so we do need to look at 2024, but we need to look beyond that. We're always talking about how do we support candidates, but we also have to be running and we have to be creating a pipeline of candidates. And one of the ways to do that is to look at other ways to serve in the public sector in government other than elected offices. So for example, in Nashville right now, the folks in the Central Labor Council are training people to be on commissions and so on. And I know, Jamala, you've served on a municipal commission, I believe. I was just on our redistricting commission, and you can get people out to vote, but if you don't have districts that are fair, your vote's still not going to make a difference. So there's a lot of places that you can serve, housing commissions, where you can actually make a difference. The thing is, though, if you do that, the people who are in those positions, they have to practice democracy in a different way. And the main way of doing that is constant communication with the base. Like in our redistricting commission, people didn't like the first districting map that we put out, but we told people, everybody saw it. They knew why we were doing it that way. They protested, we changed it, and we were able to get a district map that people felt comfortable with at the end of that process. So I think a lot of it is earning the trust of people of all races by having that kind of transparent process that really respects the people at the base. And you can do that from a variety of positions, get yourself trusted or the folks that you work with so that they can then run for higher office as time goes on. But you can have that whole pipeline, you can have that whole structure in the public government that isn't just the mayor or the governor or whatever. Thanks.
Well, we're running, we got about 14 minutes left in this. I'm wondering if we would want to pass this over. There aren't any more hands, are there, Ellen?
Well, now there is. Now Joe Barry has raised his hand, so
What's that?
Joe Barry.
Okay, well, then why don't we let Joe speak and then we'll go back to our Max and also Jay and Jamala and get some final comments before we close out.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I would, some of what I was thinking, I put in the chat, so I won't repeat that. And I know that this discussion and the book is focused, primarily on electoral politics, and that's legitimate. Not everything, but it is, that's a legitimately important sector. I wouldn't have said that 40 years ago, but I suspect some other people in the room wouldn't have said that 40 years ago or 50 years ago. 40 years ago was 1980, so some of us were starting to change our perspective about that time. With regard to electoral politics. However, I am disturbed that this whole discussion has taken place and nobody has mentioned the actual upsurge taking place at the grassroots among workers on the job, led disproportionately by Black workers, Amazon, Starbucks, campus workers, some manufacturing workers, et cetera. And I think that's a factor to be considered in any electoral discussion, as well as real discussion of what percentage of the white working class really has bought in to the right wing and what percentage can be dealt with and moved, but maybe not directly best first with electoral means.
Well, do we want to move over and Max and Jamal and Jay make some final comments before we close this out?
So yes, I
Norma?
can go. Did Norma have something to say?
Well,
Hi, are we advocating for support for a party that steals away all our policies, regardless of what? I mean, the people that, when we require that we talk to labor and they go vote a lot, they vote for Democrats. Democrats, as you can see by my post in the chat, is not a trustworthy organization. And it never is meant to be. People know that the bourgeois parties subvert left-leaning or left efforts. And labor just votes for them straight up. They don't think otherwise.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Carl, did you have a brief point and we can go to closing? Carl Davidson,
I'm gonna unmute him because he's helpless.
what's that?
I just unmuted.
Oh,
I just wanted to speak to Jamala's point. I don't think there's an easy answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mute.
I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button. Carl, you're on mute.
Okay. One thing I know that doesn't work is that if we just put together the right progressive economic package, that will win these guys back. I mean, around here, all the workers have suffered tremendously from deindustrialization and all kinds of economic, and the black workers even more so. So the interesting question is, why does one go more consistently with the Democratic Party and the other doesn't? The other goes over to the Republicans, when both of them face pretty much the same conditions. So my view is that we have to understand why people vote the way they do. And only part of it is because of the economic package of demands or platform that you might put together. A big reason why people vote is identity, and what kind of identity that they have. And changing identities of the people who are organizing and working with can be done, but it takes some time. It can be done because every one of us has a conflicted consciousness. Even some of these Trump voters that I know, they'll rant and rave about immigrants on the one hand, but on the other hand, they'll have gone down to New Mexico and they've worked with Chicano iron workers and find them the greatest people in the world, and they love visiting with their families and so on. So, and then you'll have conflicts between neo-Confederate ideas and Christian ideas at the same time. So you have all this conflicted consciousness in every single one of us. I don't like the term false consciousness. I think that needs to be thrown in the scrap heap. But conflicted consciousness is real and we all share it. And so to help change people's identity, you have to listen deeply and to find out where the tensions are in their lives and in their conditions. And you have to begin to stop them thinking that they're white. That's number one. We have to, I'm a race abolitionist in that sense. And the sooner we get people to stop thinking of themselves as white, and sooner we get them to thinking themselves as workers or as Scots-Irish or as Italian Americans, the better off we'll be. So I think that's part of the solution. But these things take time, and these people did not get to where they are overnight or in any simple way, and it's not going to be any simple magic weapon that we're going to be able, magic wand that we're going to be able to wave and bring them back. we can get some of them back, relatively simply, but it'll only be a small minority.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Now, do we want to go back to Max and Jamala and Jay for any closing comments?
Mine will be quick because I think what we've done is we dug up a lot of uncertainties, but also a lot of nuances about, strategy and tactics. But I think one of the things that we have to get really clear about is putting forth a vision of hope and aspiration for working class people. And that we haven't done a very good job of. You're talking about messaging, we haven't done that. So my thing is like, if we get that part really clear, then the strategy and tactics will flow from that. And we have to understand that we got to get into those communities where nobody is talking to them. And that's a place where I think I hardly ever see folks on the left, And so we talking to each other in other spheres, but we're not doing that base building organizing. And I know some of us are way past our prime to do that. But I think to Mayju's point, there's some other ways that we could be supported in that movement by being in those places, being at those tables where, some of those decisions are being made. But I think there's a role for all of us to play once we clearly state the vision and get our strategy and tactics together and really, have a clear political analysis of the situation.
I want to finish out by helping Max promote his organization, Convergence. And in my preparation for this evening's get together, I looked at I'm on their email list. I looked at the latest issue, which has to do with the Chicago election 2023 that's coming up, and some of the concerns that they will be addressing in that electoral campaign. And I think that's a good guide for those in other urban situations to look at that and to look at the material that Convergence is putting out. It's very useful, and it's a great service, and I thank them for doing that. Well, also, I think Ellen put the link to Convergence in the chat feature, so anybody interested in subscribing, I think you can get on there.
I'm going to thank Jay for that plug, and he read my mind. That piece was written by one of the officers of the Chicago Teachers Union, and I think that from an overall left point of view, Joe's right that the most hopeful thing going on right now is the renewed militancy in the labor movement. And I would recommend some other things that have been on Convergence about that, including even before the Amazon victory, a long 2-3-part series, I forget which, coordinated by our executive editor, who came out of the labor movement in Chicago, about lessons from to organize Walmart and how they apply to Amazon, and discussion with the Amazon workers. So there's a lot of stuff there that I think is useful. Rebuilding the labor movement, as I think we mentioned before, is absolutely crucial to any defense of democracy or working class advance. The trouble we have now, the immediate problem, besides the problems of how to do that in general, is that the timetable with the electoral threats we face right now is they don't align. So rebuilding the labor movement, even with the tremendous outpouring of militancy right now, is a decade-long or more project. It's not going to be accomplished between now and 2024. And we face an emergency situation in 2022 and 2024, staving off basically an American form of fascism. So investing in rebuilding the labor movement is crucial, but we have to recognize it's not going to pay off in the electoral arena in the short term. And how this, to me, just reinforces a point Jamala made earlier, which is if we were all part of a national progressive front or organization or a national left thing, we could make some collective decision about where we invested our resources. and what we put into the long-term task of rebuilding the labor movement and how we juggled that with immediate imperative of staving off the fascists. We don't have that situation yet. So each group has to make those kinds of decisions on their own. And we're not in a position to coordinate in that way. I think identifying that is an important thing, and it helps us understand and be sympathetic to groups that make a different decision than the one we might make, because those tasks are important and we don't have the capacity right now to coordinate on the level that we need. But that is another thing that we aspire to if we're going to really fight for political power. So that's it.
Thank you, Max, and also thanks Jamala and Jay. This is a great discussion. We have a lot of work to do, and I feel like we've got a hard few years ahead of us. I want to thank Jay. I thought of that because I failed to mention Convergence magazine when I introduced you, Max. I think I had that in my notes, but I just went right past it. But I encourage people to go there and read some of the wonderful articles that are there, and also buy the book, and all the links are in the chat. So this can't be our last discussion, maybe in different circles or whatever, but there's a lot more discussion needs to go on, a lot more planning and organization, and we need to move forward with that task for 2022 and 2024.
Organize.
Yes, and CCDS does this the fourth Monday of every month, and we do have a program planned for May. But I can't remember what it is. Can you tell me what it is, Harry?
I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be on the six-party system.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, good follow-up to this. So, thank you everybody for attending and for this great discussion. And hope to see you all again soon. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Jamala. Just thanks, Jay, and everyone else. And this reporting will be on Online University on the left. The recording is there. I'll send it out.
I put